Hello, my name is Joshua, and I'd like to talk again about another controversial topic. And really, what I'm going to call this one is my disgust with modernity, meaning not that I hate modernity. I'm not saying that, or modernism. In fact, my ideas and thoughts about modernity and modernism are probably a lot different than, say, another thinker, but ultimately that there is a certain feature of modernism that I really don't like. And I'm not conservative. So that's the first thing I have to say before I get into this. But it's going to sound conservative in terms of what I'm saying because what I ultimately concern myself with as a person is phenomenology, existentialism, and humanism rather than any kind of political ideas in particular, because maybe it's just because I was raised in the South. I really do not have as much faith in governmental and political matters as maybe other people in America may have. Not to say that I do not appreciate government, because I definitely am not an anarchist. Definitely more so a Hobbesian in my thinking of social organization and structures. I think you do need some kind of law and organization to police people within structures, because human beings are not intrinsically moral. I don't think that about human beings, and I think that you do have to establish, just for the mere sake of efficiency in commerce and parlance, common customs, practices. This is what we do around here in order to get this, and you can understand this as this, and specifically this under these conditions and circumstances. Things like that, just because they make communication and the actual functioning of bureaucracy as efficient as it can be. But I can tell you, I do not like it, but I do understand the value of roads in public education and many other amenities that we find here in the West. But I think that our tendency to really evaluate things from the perspective of some kind of ideal or sets of ethics rather than particularly human phenomenology or what it means to be human. That's where I really draw the line. I think when you start from the standpoint of human phenomenology, you're going to find yourself agreeing with many different things rather than just specific particular things. So it's why I don't, even though I'm not a Christian and I'm not religious, I don't necessarily hold any kind of hostility towards them. I do have criticism of Christianity in the West, but even my criticisms of Christianity have more to do with trying to understand Western mythos and Western consciousness than it does have to do with being an atheist. And so, I mean, look, man, I don't know really what to call myself. I'm not really, so I'm an atheist, but really, when you want to talk about my atheism, really, which I would have to talk about my being Christian and why I'm not a Christian, I can even say for my atheism, I didn't become an atheist because I really had a problem with the intellectual viability of Christianity. So what I mean is that really I was not persuaded by atheistic arguments or facts in and of themselves um, to not be a Christian. So I didn't decide I was no longer a Christian because I thought Christianity didn't make sense, or that I believed that the untruth of Christianity could be understood from the landscape of facts or logic specifically. So, because I was very Christian, so I was very fundamentalistically Christian. I was a Presbyterian, a Catholic, and a Baptist, like most of my life. And the most genteel version of Christianity I ever acted out was non-denominational Christianity. But I was raised Baptist, went Catholic, went Presbyterian, and then ended non denominational. But even in the non-denominational Christianity, I went towards moderate non-denominational Christianity. I was not liberal. I was not a liberal Christian. I really wasn't a liberal Christian. And so I didn't really like the arguments that people are persuaded by from either the leftist standpoint or the completely scientific rationalistic standpoint. I wasn't exactly convinced by. I mean, I've known about evolutionary theory since I was maybe 7 years old, from PBS, and yeah, it didn't stop me from believing in God. And so that's not why I'm not a Christian. I wouldn't say that. And so I don't really think like the criticisms against Christianity or religion in general from those standpoints are very valid or convincing. I would just say convincing. They're not things that are going to convince me because I always thought from even whenever I was a Christian that look, whatever it means to have justification for something, for believing or thinking something, it ends at a certain point. So there's a really clear line where it ends, where you do have to assume certain things in order to come to conclusions and know about things in the world. And so I really thought that, look, just because the basis for my understanding of what's going on in the world is faith, and the basis for your understanding of what's going on in the world is an assumptive basis that is not the assumptive basis of faith, doesn't mean the assumptive basis that's not faith is any more right than the assumptive basis that is faith. We don't really know what it means for there to be a right basis for thinking in the world. And trust me, I thought this as a Christian, because I thought, look, you don't really know if the point of being in the world is arriving at the truth necessarily, or it's arriving at the truth with love or with respects to love. And so that, I don't know if anybody else gets that, but that was my thinking as a Christian, which, don't get me wrong, love did not ever supersede the truth in my thinking. But I thought, look, you can't think about this. I can't think about it just purely from the standpoint of true as true as true as true, the will to truth being primary in my understanding of the world, because it didn't seem to me that the will to truth in my understanding of the world was the basis for why I was doing anything that I was doing. Because I could understand from the standpoint of my phenomenology as a Christian, like, why do I do X, Y, and Z? It's because I think I'm supposed to love people, and I think it's because I'm supposed to love God, and people are made in the image of God. So I love people because people are just another representation of God in some way. Even if people get on my nerves, even if I don't like them. So, because I mean, we're not different. And that's part of the reason why I could be a Christian. It's part of the reason why I definitely know that some of the ideas that were prominent in egalitarianism and in Enlightenment and things like that are definitely fundamentally Christian. There's no other place I could really attribute their etymology or genealogy, and so I don't. And so it's why, even though, for example, critical theory is very what would I say, modern and postmodern, in fact, it's fundamentally a Christianity to me. Feminism, veganism, egalitarianism, fundamentally in their bases of assumptions and axioms, like the way in which their actual reasoning, the basic assumptions that they have to assume about phenomenological and metaphysical things, which is why it's really funny to me that they denigrate Western philosophy, because Western philosophy really tells you what they are. So not from the standpoint that like, all right, so it's just understand metaphysics. So the metaphysics of feminism, or the metaphysics of science, or the metaphysics of anything. And so people are going to again think like, well, why are you talking about metaphysics? So I again am a philosopher, somebody who studies philosophy and things like that. And I was a Christian for a very, very long time. Like my thinking about things is not materialistic, complete, or at least like completely materialistic. I am trained as a scientist, so that's true, and I understand science and the scientific method and everything like that. But my interest, I guess, like in matters in the world localize themselves to a few topics: phenomenology, humanism, and existentialism, broadly philosophy, and analytic philosophy. But I don't value analytic philosophy as much as I value continental philosophy, because analytic philosophy to me it's only valuable for its understanding of logic, and it can't really appraise the material world because its basic assumptions about the material world can be shown to be logically incorrect. And so, it's like the point of analytic philosophy to me is to demonstrate the limits to thinking, or the limits to a certain school of thought. And that's really what I value about it. But if I think about philosophy as a human enterprise and what's the point of philosophy, I think the point of philosophy is trying to understand what it is to be in the world and what things are. And I think that underneath, philosophy is a question of what, how, and why. That's what's going on. And maybe in philosophy, we've learned that why takes many contributing schools of thought in order to arrive at, and how maybe really only something accessible to domains of natural science. But what things are, I don't think that that's something that many other things can tell you. I think that that's something that only philosophy can tell you. And that's what I value about philosophy. And that's what I value about every school of philosophy and thinking that has come about, the aspect they have in making clear what things are. So that's metaphysics. And so I'm an epistemological pessimist. I'm not exactly very optimistic about the pursuit of truth and knowledge from a certain standpoint, but nonetheless, like this is what really influences why I think certain ways about modernity, not really due to any kind of concretely materialistic reasons, because I don't think I could prove some of the things that I think from a mathematical standpoint or a logically deductive standpoint. And I definitely don't think that I'm ever going to be able to conduct any experiment that would show these things to be the case. But I think when one does historical or genealogical, so genealogical analysis is historical reasoning with philosophical interpretation via various schools of philosophical metaphysics. And so that's what the genealogical method comes down to. And so it has many different lenses, like if histories you can look at, and schools of metaphysical appraisal that you could look at. I mean, and so genealogy is as old as Augustus, I believe, in philosophy. But most, I guess, powerfully used by Nietzsche and Foucault, and Heidegger, and maybe Hegel was really the first like prominent genealogy. But Hegel is a historical thinker, so genealogy is not purely history of philosophy or trying to understand philosophy from a historical vantage point, but it is like those things coming together. There are a lot of contributors to the school of genealogical thought. Scheider, German philosopher, is another one. There's a lot of ways. And look. The point I'm trying to make is that this is the vein Well, I gotta move because my battery's about to die. So this is the vein of my thought, as it pertains towards modernity. And so, with that said, I'd like to say, look, modernism, to me, the serious problem with it is that it does try to champion a set of ideas that are not predicated on any aspect of phenomenology or understanding the existential aspects of human existence. And so one may say, well, man, like, look, you're supposedly somebody who's interested in rationality and logic. Like, what the hell do you care about those things? So I'm fundamentally an anthropologist, like, in my, I guess, natural attention. So whenever my attention is waning or revolving out in the world, I'm like a philosopher and an anthropologist. I guess that's the best way I can put it. I'm trying to understand like why things look the way that they do, what can explain for the appearances and mechanisms and happenings in the world, and what's going on with people, and why do they look like that, why do they say this, why do they do that. Because I can tell you as a person, like, my instincts are not exactly the most socially useful in real time, like in certain ways. So like it can be awkward and things like that in social settings and so on and so forth. But I'm very deeply interested in people because I guess just because I'm a human being. And so this proclivity leads me towards a certain anthropological hypothesizing in my thinking. I try to understand the human animal, and it's chiefly the human animal or the kind of logical principles that can be arrived at by looking at various patterns in the world. Like whether it's physics, whether it's mathematics or philosophy or something like that, patterns, man, I'm into them. And so that's really all that's going on with my thinking. And so a lot of times whenever I think about what's wrong with our ideation about our political attentions and I guess like cultural and societal agendas, we don't really seem to understand ourselves. So I'd put it like this, that we do have a nature. So I don't care how people think we got here. Like really what you do have to understand is that there is something very particular about what it means to be human. I don't know what it is, and I don't know why it is. So I'd phrase it like that. But I know that it's very, very important to understand because it's really the only reason why certain things are the way that they are in the world. And so what I mean by that is that people are going to really have a problem with my definition of real in certain ways, but I just use it like this because it makes sense from the standpoint and of an anthropological evaluation of societal structures and reality. And when I mean anthropology, I mean understanding human beings from a complete standpoint. So understanding us from what we are as we are culturally, but also what we are as animals and historically. And so in all the ways in which this fits together. So if you're asking who I am as a psychologist, I'm probably a phenomenological humanist psychologist. So I only care about the human animal in its totality. I don't like reductionism. I don't like simple explanations because no matter how useful they are in a certain vein of analysis. So here's what I like. Whenever we're talking about atoms are one thing, I like this simplicity. I think the material world in natural systems are a lot easier to understand than organic ones. And so I think that whenever I think about mathematics and natural systems, there is a way I like to think about it. And mathematics is binary, and I actually like that about mathematics. It's always the same thing, always. And I like that about mathematics. I don't dislike that about mathematics. I say mathematics is a world of familiar forms, kind of to borrow a note from Plato. But when I was reading, whatever, anyways. So mathematics is a world of familiar forms, and so that's what I like about mathematics. However, whenever I try to understand human beings or reality or like natural systems, like organic systems, they're not like mathematics. So like maybe you can use mathematics and things like that. I'm also interested in like why things don't fit a certain way. So how my thinking works is like this. Someone tells me something, I make an observation, then I see something about that observation that doesn't fit with what they've told me. And so then I'm interested why this thing doesn't fit with what I've been told or what I heard or what I think or have thought initially about this thing. And so I have to investigate it. Whenever I look at people, there are things that need a lot of research or re-investigation on top of investigation on top of investigation. You will never be done with this exercise. It seems like peeling back the layers of an onion, and there are many reasons for why we may not ever be done with this exercise, I think, but because we're like this, none the damn less, you know, it's like, or because understanding human beings are like this, so it's daytime, whatever. Okay, so as long as you people don't care about seeing my face as clearly as, you know, whatever I'm trying to present it, it's fine. But, so whatever, look, what I'd put it like this, that whenever you're trying to really understand who or what a person is or why they appear that way in the world, it's just like peeling back the layers of an onion, and I don't know if we really are going to get down to the bottom of it at all. But I think what's fair in trying to understand human beings, because I think the things that are true about human beings is that we are one kind of thing. So even though there are many different iterations or appearances of ourselves, like whether that's culturally or ethically or morally or even phenotypically, we are emotionally, instinctually, motivationally, and personificatively, meaning we have very similar personas, the same animal, like 100%. And that to me are the same thing. Whether or not you want to think of us as animals or whatever, that's what's true about us. And because that's true, I think that there is something at bottom of what it means to be fair. And I think that this is fair in understanding personhood, because if you're going to understand what relational dynamics are, I think you have to think more in terms of reciprocity between personhoods rather than series of transactions. So personhood has magnitude and it has relevance and value to it in terms of a means of appraisal. So whenever you're interacting with people, it's not just the fact that you're interacting with the person, though your interaction with the person colors your mind or it motivates your mind to think in a certain frame of interpretation and analysis. But then also the particular person you're talking about with respect to your history, culture, and all these other sorts of things. Your mind also has a certain framework of interpretation it wants to apply to that person. And so because our means of being in the world is via communication, which is instrumentized through interaction, which is what I'd say, that means when we're thinking about ourselves and what to do with one another, ethics and morality, and so on and so forth, we have to understand actually what it means as we are relating as an animal or the thing we are, our being, which is why I like phenomenology, because it makes it easier to talk about these things. We have to understand either the vantage point of our relating from being or relating to being in order to actually come up with any kind of ethic or morality that's actually going to function or work, which is why I think that most of our historical systems, whether religious or whatever, are better understood as from a standpoint of cultural and historical significance rather than absolute truth. Though I definitely have my ideas about the truth, I do think that truth in its expressions, if I'm just going to put it like that, across the phenomenological landscape, does not seem, from my estimations, to be the monopoly of one group, culture, or period in history. And so I have an attitude towards culture or understanding culture or religion from the standpoint of understanding human phenomenology and trying to understand human phenomenology. Though all of my philosophy may not look like that, or at least all the ways in which I think may not look like that, because whenever I'm trying to give basis for the frameworks I'm using and the systems or the justification, I don't rest it in like the phenomenological landscape, because I'm trying to convince certain people of things and so on and so forth, particularly myself. And so, it's like it's a process. But either way, that's all I care about, like ultimately. Now, I definitely am still studying philosophy and things like that, but I've been studying philosophy a lot longer than I've been studying mathematics or physics. So I'd put it like that. So mathematics and physics I encountered in college. I started paying attention to them in college. Philosophy, I paid attention to philosophy as early as middle school. And so it's different because, so look, man, it's like I don't consider them all the same thing. I just put it like that. I think that they all are trying to, they're all different blind people gripping on different parts of an elephant, to borrow an analogy. Like, I'd put it like that. And so that's how I relate myself to all of them, but I'd put it like this: as I relate to religion, or I relate to aspects of culture or politics, it's pretty much from the standpoint of a trying to understand human phenomenology, or the phenomenological consequences of things, and the empirical ones, because those are the only ones I think I can make out. Like, I think I can know something about, and so that's what I'm comfortable with doing. I'm not trying to tell other people how to think, but okay, so look, the number one thing that I think is disgusting about modernity is that one of the things I think that's true about religion, or I think is true about the emergences of certain historical artifacts, is they're communicating something about human phenomenology. They have something of a truth to them, and so they need to be understood. But I think our very modern obsession with tribalism and really a certain egalitarian agenda is really, really anti-humanistic, and so I don't like it. So I know that phenomenology in some ways is considered a break with humanism, but I mean, look, man, I'm not gonna say like I'm a classical phenomenologist or something like that. I've read Jaspers and I've read Husserl. I still have to read Heidegger and Scheller and a few others, but I'm getting there. I mean, anyways, but I definitely, and when I say anti-human, I mean to ignore what it means for being to be in the world. Like, that's 100% what I mean. To ignore what it means for being to be in the world, or to try and coerce being to be something in the world at the expense of being in the interest of some sort of ideal or idea or something like that. And I fucking hate that, so that's what I don't like. So I hate that so much. It's why I think so much, because I don't want to be a prisoner to ideas. Like, it's very paradoxical about what it means to be a thinker, because I know ideas are not innocuous, so they're not innocent, and I know people just don't have them, like, innocently and things like that. And I also know that people like to influence other people's thinking for their own purposes and uses and all other sorts of things, and so this is why I tend to think this way. But what I hate mostly about modernity is that you can characterize its attention and its attitude and ethics about many, many things, too many to name, in such a short time frame, that it champions something at the expense of being. And so I don't like that. I don't think being is necessarily moral either. And so I think trying to understand what it means to be a being in the world, in the lived context of the world, is something that is very complicated, but is the most important thing to try and figure out. And so, yeah, and that's also why I'm not hostile to most other things that are different than myself, or I try to understand them, because they come and they're represented in some other way, but they're represented in the world. Definitely I encounter them from the standpoint of my phenomenological vantage point in the world. So experiencing other people and culture and so on and so forth in the world, and trying to get down to the bottom of a certain set of ideas that other cultures or philosophers or thinkers have valued, and why they do, and what this has to say about what it means to be human, and so on and so forth. But that's really what I'm doing, and because that's what I'm doing, I noticed that modernity is really not good at this. So we are more interested in ideas rather than people, which is very, very, very funny, because the number one ethic is diversity. But I tell you, I don't know what that diversity is about, because it's not necessarily about ideas either, because ideas come from people and people groups, okay? And so it's not about ideas. That diversity is not about ideas, and that diversity is not necessarily about people. I don't know what that diversity is interested in, but it's not interested in either of those things. So I'm fundamentally opposed to it. I don't like it. And so that's a feature of modernism that I absolutely hate. And so, and there are other things. So materialism is another thing. But I don't dislike science. I just don't like materialism necessarily as the idea of the truth. So not as the idea of truth, but as the idea of the truth. It's just not absolute. And anytime somebody tries to think that it makes sense that you can know with certainty that the universe is made up of matter, I think you're stupid. Because, well, I don't think you're stupid, but I think you're not reasoning very thoroughly. I think why scientists, especially because I was trained to be a scientist, why scientists apply the idea of the world being made up of matter is because it's useful. It's not because we know for certain that that's the way things actually are. And so I would say those two, that one takes less time to explain, but the first one, I think, those are two features about modernism that I don't necessarily care for. So this is a exposition of my disgust with modernism. Or modernity. I shouldn't say modernism. I should say contemporary